Have you been wondering how these six know-it-alls got together? Well, back in 2020, after 6 months of COVID-19 pandemic isolation, Barbara Brackman decided she needed some company. She invited 5 quilty friends to join her for Zoom cocktail parties every other Monday evening in order to discuss the state of the country and maybe some quilts too. So convivial were the Zooms that they decided to gather virtually every week instead of every 2 weeks. Quilt soon became the main focus of these discussions, of course. Questions were raised, pondered, and discussed, debated, and occasionally settled about particular examples that were brought to the party. Julie Silber then declared that surely the public would be fascinated by their discussions. And so the six know-it-alls, a tongue firmly in cheek name, was born. It quickly became apparent that technical help was required, so Tara Miller of the Quilt District came on board. After 3 freebie sessions, the six know-it-alls, all professional quilt historians with a combined experience of a quarter of a millennium, began to charge for the programs. We're so happy you could join us.
Welcome. I'm Barbara Brackman, and I am your host for episode 14 of our six know-it-alls. And tonight we're going to focus on individual quilters who've left us a body of work. That's a rather unusual circumstance because we have so many quilts where we don't even know the name of the maker, much less what else she made. So tonight we're going to look at something we really love to explore, which is the idea that someone has left us more than at least 3 quilts is our minimum here. So all 6 know-it-alls are going to comment, and 5 of us are going to present quilters rather than quilts. We're going to begin with our Debby Cooney, because one thing we want to look at is how these quilt makers who left us the body of work, how they fit into the context of the styles of what was happening in their time. And Debbie's quite an expert on the Baltimore quilts from the 1840s to 1860s, the quilts made in the city. She's an independent scholar, and with her friend Rhonda McAllen, she's looked closely at Baltimore city quilts. And tonight she's going to tell us about a rural Marylander and her body of work. So Debbie, if you would share your screen.
Okay. Mary Brown. According to Gloria Allen, who did the early research on this quilt, Mary Brown lived in an extended Quaker kinship network that encompassed northern Cecil County and Maryland and Chester County, Pennsylvania. She may have lived in Baltimore in her early years. Her family had relatives in the city, but seems to have lived most of their lives in East Nottingham, Cecil County, Maryland. There is some dispute these days about Mary's parentage and marital status, but her tombstone and Gloria Allen say that she was the daughter of Jesse and Rebecca Brown. While Mary may have been separated from the Quaker meeting membership for bearing an illegitimate son, she seems to have interacted with Quakers in all her life and is buried with them in the old part of the brick meeting house cemetery. A few graves near hers are those of Israel and Elizabeth Reynolds. According to the last family owner of this quilt, Israel commissioned this magnificent thing done in both applique and reverse applique in a combination of older central medallion style and the newer block style. Israel's initials appear in the 2 corners at the bottom with the date of 1852. Mary stitched her name, age, and date in the center diamond. The excellence of this large album is really hard to overstate. The graceful motifs and placement of the flowers and birds at the center and the inner border have rarely been equaled. The outside border of paper cutouts and exotic blossoms completes an elaborate and unusual composition. No photographs do this quilt justice. Rhonda's close-ups from the quilts exhibition in Houston show the intense quilting and invite comparison with Baltimore album quilts being produced at the same time. Israel Reynolds was a prosperous farmer and Mary's neighbor, who obviously knew of her great skills. She is listed in the 1850 census with no occupation, but as a mantua maker and dressmaker in 1860. Humility was a Quaker virtue. Brown used a variety of colorful prints to great effect. The thin stems of the floral sprays are done in reverse applique. The 8-layered wing of this parrot and the overlapping petals of the exotic flowers suggest Brown had seen Baltimore album quilts and adopted similar techniques. At a flea market, Polymello found several unfinished Brown blocks in many of the same fabrics. Mary must have supplied other quilt makers with her designs in kit form, as many Baltimore professionals did. A very similar album quilt came to market with no provenance. According to Gloria, this is not as sophisticated as the Israel Reynolds album. It lacks her signature reverse applique work, but does have so many other typical Brown designs, including birds, squirrel, parrots, sunflowers, pineapple, 7 stars, and many florals. I do notice this floral spray here, the crab block, and the owl. You'll be seeing those again, as well as many of these other. Pearsons and Browns were interrelated Quaker families living in southeastern Pennsylvania and Cecil County, Maryland. Laurie Stubbs has studied these families and their kin for years. She and Carol Bourne tracked down a quilt at the Ohio History Center listed as made by or for a Martha Pearson in 1847 in East Nottingham, New Hampshire. When it was unrolled, they knew immediately it was Mary Brown. Much of the work is done in reverse applique, and the quilt has many stem floral sprays, double birds, daisy-like clusters, crab blocks, and paper cuts from the same as the previous shown albums. Laurie found the inscribed names of the sisters who signed the quilt, Martha and Adeline Pearson, in East Nottingham Township, Cecil County, of course. A related album dated 1848 on the front and 1853 on the back includes both Martha and Adeline and other Pearsons of Chester County, Pennsylvania, and northern Delaware. It includes the owl and 7 stars block of the quilt engagement calendar, and spindly reversed applique florals, pineapple, crab, and fleur-de-lis seen on other Brown quilts. Its simple layout and quilting say that Brown probably supplied blocks, but did not make this one. A block signed Polly Brown, Brick Meeting House, in 1850, is part of an album for Barclay Reynolds. Polly is a nickname for Mary. Her typical slender stems are inlaid and wavy. Other blocks in her superlative style are in this swirling flowers almost identical to Polly's, plus the bellflower and spiky leaved daisies. These are inscribed largely by Reynolds. Barclay was a cousin of Israel Reynolds, and both the Reynolds and Browns attended Quaker meetings in the Brick Meeting House, and many are buried in its cemetery. This name-inscribed album, made for Mary L. Mearns in 1853, was thought to be the complete work of Mary Brown by Gloria Allen and other researchers. Mary's immediate family, plus Israel Reynolds, is grouped all in the center, then aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends. Israel Reynolds was married to Mary's sister Elizabeth. Many of the inscriptions seem to refer to some sort of loss that Mary suffered, but she never married, so a death or a broken engagement is a possibility. The work on the Mearns quilt is outstanding, and the quilting is very fine, and it is finished with a double corded binding. Both quilts feature Brown spiky leaf sprays of petaled flowers. 2 very similar quilts of appliques that are diamonds in Mary Brown's style, with her floral and animal motifs or copies, are known. The Shelburne Museum's information is that Mary Jane Carr lived in western Lancaster County, close to the Maryland border. The bright blue compote and swags, cornucopias, realistic flowers, all suggest familiarity with Baltimore album quilts. Research is underway to determine the source of the patterns and whether such tops were available as basted kits, given the existence of This quilt made in the same unmistakable style and fabrics. This one came to the Covells without any provenance. Several other quilts contain blocks that may have been produced by Brown or were made in some sort of association with her. The block on the Baltimore album is signed by Mary Brown. Its arching stems and spiky leaves are hallmarks of her style. The quilt was made for a Methodist minister by congregants of his various assignments in Baltimore, Pennsylvania, and Illinois. How Brown was associated with this project is still unknown. The words Sophia Pyle's quilt, pieced by her mother in 1848, are inscribed beneath the center floral vase with Mary Brown's delicate reverse applique and cutwork. Other Brown style blocks are the crab, the feather circles, elaborate 8 and 4 lobe paper cuts. The Pyles had seven more children, all of whose names were signed, and the family definitely lived in Cecil County. Other names were Quakers living in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. Polly's album was found in southeastern Pennsylvania. Its center pineapple block sits among others that have Mary Brown characteristics, especially the paper cut blocks. The large crossed pineapples are very similar to another of Polly's unfinished blocks. Its companion here is a Mary Brown sunflower, one she used frequently. Mary Worrell was born in 1824, a daughter of Quakers Elizabeth and Jacob Parry in Delaware County, just east of Chester County and south of Philadelphia. It is inscribed by members of the Parry and Worrell families and other relatives and friends, many of them Quakers. Mary was 21 years old in 1845 and married in 1851. The paper cut block suggests Mary Brown, but this style of quilt, often in turkey red fabrics, is seen often in Chester and Delaware counties and among Quakers living in nearby Maryland. Thus, the connection with Mary Brown becomes pretty tenuous. The Philadelphia Museum of Art describes this album as one of a related group made in Delaware County in the mid-19th century. The blocks are largely paper cuts and certainly resemble those of the Chester County and Cecil County quilts. Until further information on the originators of these blocks and quilts is found, however, any association with Mary Brown is too speculative to assign to her authorship at the moment.
Very nice. I had no idea there were so many. Wonderful. So what can we say? I mean,
Well,
you just look at those parrot blocks,
Yeah.
and they're so recognizable, and you don't see them anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about scale. You were talking about shared blocks and certain blocks that are recognizable. It seems like the scale was very different from, you know, some quilt to some quilt. Is it the exact same block but a different size?
There do seem to be different sizes of that, which means that you could scale it up and down. I've only seen some of these by picture, but they do look like they come in various sizes. But the one of Polly's block and the one on the a former Esprit collection quilt, the first one you saw, looked to be pretty similar and in size too, and they're the same fabrics. So I think there's probably variation. There are dogs larger on some quilts than others.
Mm-hmm.
So that could mean that other people are copying what she did.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah.
I was also struck by how many have scalloped edges, appear to have scalloped. Is that another feature?
You know, that there were more, especially in Maryland, than has been talked about much, but it wasn't that unusual. But there were, for whatever reason, a lot of them did come out finished with scalloped edges. It just depended, I suppose, on who was doing it. Most of hers don't, but the few that do might have been made by other people.
Cool.
I think you should also clarify for people who are new to studying Baltimore albums and the Maryland quilts, is that we really feel very strongly that there were seamstresses who sold the blocks. Someone as skilled as Mary Brown, a mantua maker is a dressmaker. And there was obviously a fashion for this. And I think, you know, they basted them and sold them so you could stitch them down. I would imagine they stitched them and you could just buy it and put your name on it. Or they'd give you a kit with the fabrics. Because we've seen fabrics in these blocks that we've never seen anywhere else.
Yeah.
Which is a very mysterious thing.
And the same exact block with the same exact fabrics again. It's not a coincidence, and with different names attached. So
yes. At first, you know, we Ellie Sienkiewicz brought this up years ago. And at first it was just shocking because we are artistes. You don't use kits, excuse me. And to find that our Baltimore bride quilts or kits is astounded us, but we've adapted over the 34 years.
Polly's set of blocks is the only one I know of that are just distinct kit, but they finished. So we have not seen one that's just basted like some Baltimore's are. So that would be interesting to see whether those still exist that we can find.
I have a question, Debbie. Has any Baltimore album quilt, besides the three of, like the first one, set in a central diamond, and the two that Mary Koval, the Kovals and those two, let's see, what do I want to say? Are there any Baltimore album quilts attributed to anybody else that are done in a central medallion style?
With that vine, you mean?
Well, instead of block style.
Oh, yes, there are.
Inside the diamond.
a couple.
Well, that is
Well, there
something
are a couple that have a larger block in the middle.
Yeah.
On the square more.
Yeah.
I don't know of a Baltimore that is like that. I
So
can't
look.
So
I can't
that
think of one.
format is probably, that format itself is probably hers, whether she made the second two quilts or not. They were going after her style.
It
Well,
does seem to
that-
be distinctive, right?
That could be.
Yeah. Because by the mid 40s, when the Baltimore album comes around, you're well into the block format, and the central medallion is a very kind of retro or you know, old-fashioned style by that time.
Yeah, it is interesting that she's up in the Philadelphia area where the center diamond didn't really catch on in the earlier days, and yet here it is, you know, in the late 1840s. So it's hard to know where she was getting this, where she, you know.
Right.
I don't know. There are a lot there. Maybe it's Maryland, because the center diamond style in chintz has lasted quite a bit longer there than other places. So
And Eastern Shore,
have been
just
that.
Eastern Shore, you know,
Yes.
of the center
yes,
diamond.
yes. And we're out of time.
We
So-
are out of time. You're the
Yes.
timekeeper. But I do want to say one more thing. Mary Kay, I'm struck by some of the images there. That
I
look
know,
very much
I
like
know.
the
Here we
presentation.
go. Here we
I
go.
know. Well, we will discuss that later. All right, we're going to go to our next speaker. And she is Alden O'Brien, curator of costumes and textiles at the DAR Museum in Washington. And one of the collection's strengths, they have many strengths, is a body of work attributed to Amelia Lauck.
Thank you. And yes, and it's spelled Lauck, but it's always been pronounced Lock. And all the 3 or 4 descendants, branches of descendants, have all made sure that I knew that, which
Oh, thank you.
fortunately I did. So some of you may be familiar with the quilts of Amelia Lauck because I've given several lectures about them, and you may have seen them on exhibit at Williamsburg, who own 2 of the quilts attributed to her, and or at the DAR in Ion Elegance, which is still online, and we own another 2. So let me just go back, and here are the 4 quilts that we know are associated with Amelia Lauck. And the top are ours, and the bottom are Williamsburgs. And you can see that one of each of ours is lacking the outer border. So here you can see Williamsburg's on display there a few years ago, and ours next to each other back in 2007. Amelia and her husband, Peter, who was a Revolutionary War veteran, were children of German immigrants who had moved from Pennsylvania down to Winchester. And they owned the Red Lion Tavern and later moved just outside the town to this nice property, which ironically is now an alcohol and drug rehab center. So Winchester may seem very rural and frontier, but it was on the Great Wagon Road. And as many scholars have demonstrated, fine goods, including fashionable prints used in quilts, were available from local merchants. And the Laucks had themselves and their children painted by itinerant portraitists Charles Peel Polk and Jacob Freimeyer. Rebecca is seen embroidering a waistcoat, demonstrating her genteel education, and she's wearing an up-to-date embroidered muslin dress. So we're not talking about scrap quilts or backwoods here. Amelia gave birth to something like 11 or 13 children, I can't remember exactly, but 6 lived to adulthood. And I suspect she made 6 quilts for the 6 kids, but I'm sure that Joseph's was lost before 1900 for reasons to do with his personal history and the fact his granddaughter, the family historian, wrote about Rebecca's, but not her own branch's quilts. And I think if it had existed in the 1870s or 80s when she was writing her little memoir, she would have mentioned it. And Isaac's may still be out there. So if you see something that looks like one of those, please call me. So our first Amelia that we acquired back in 1987 is on the left here. And it was made as a gift to the only daughter, Rebecca, long after she married. But it was a gift to her, and it's dated 1823. We'll see that block later. A descendant of son William donated the one on the right, which has lost its outer border. Now the donor says she still has the pieces of the outer border somewhere, so I keep hoping. So those of you who want to light candles, please feel free to do so. And Williamsburg purchased Williams' quilt on the right here, also missing its outer border, at auction. And then when they put it on display, someone saw it and said, oh, I collect quilts. I bought one like that a number of years ago. Maybe you'd like it. So that's how they acquired the one on the left. And I am pretty sure that this belonged to son Samuel, so I'm going to refer to it as Samuel's. And what you see down at the bottom are a single pillow sham made from 4 pieces of the outer border of Morgan's quilt. Sorry, did I say Williams? I meant Morgan's. So here are the 4. Now, obviously, Amelia liked this format. Center medallion, typical of the time and region, delectable mountains borders, also popular there in the Shenandoah Valley. Chintz applique using, in the center, using birds and flowers from costly imported chintzes, and a lot of stuffed work in a fabulous variety of motifs. Now, here are each quilt's pink fabrics. She liked these pink resists that you see on the top and bottom on the left here, and there's a little extra color on the other 2. The quilt I'll call Samuel's ran out of fabric and used 2 additional pink fabrics on the outer border. Samuel's uses these peafowl that we see on lots of other Maryland and Virginia and other quilts of the period. Appropriately for the DAR, ours both have stuffed eagles in the center with inscriptions in the ribbons in their beaks, which have to do with who the quilts were given to. The center medallions are mostly the same, except Morgan's quilt at Williamsburg doesn't cut the fabric into wreaths. So did she get tired of doing wreaths? This was made for the youngest son, or was this actually her first effort and then she decided to start cutting them up? She reused the same print that you see in the corner there, using mostly the pointed petal blooms in one quilt and round ones and additional roses in others. Each border is treated slightly differently from the other borders and from each other. Samuel's is usually significantly different from the other 3 And his here has a corded vine instead of rows of floral sprays. Between the Delectable Mountains, Amelia really went to town with stuffed flowers, except for Samuel's, which has a much more basic repeating pattern of sort of little tulips. Here's a selection of flowers from just Rebecca's quilt. So far, I have not found any that are exact repeats from a template in hers or comparing hers to some of the ones at Williamsburg. In the second white border, we see what I call her signature motif, which is the 8-petaled flower surrounded by a feather wreath with feather fronds on both sides. And in the last border, you get more flowers or alternating grapes and feathers. And you can kind of see that in this photo from Antiques Magazine in 1931, when Morgan's quilt was photographed there. You can just about see over here, it's grapes and a feather frond, grapes and a feather frond. Incredibly tantalizing is this quilt, which sold at Jeffrey Evans, located right in the Shenandoah Valley, but which Debbie sadly saw only after it sold. I've been unable to contact the buyer to beg for a closer view, but it sure looks like it's an Amelia. And could it be the outer border from Morgan's quilt? IDK, again, if you're the buyer, please get in touch. I just want to look. And these also look remarkably similar. The Virginia Museum one has a very garbled family history that can't be correct, but I've found it very difficult to trace the supposed people. But so it's different enough from the Laucks that I wonder if it was made by someone else in the community rather than Amelia. And the one pictured in Orlovsky lacks provenance, but it sure begs a question, along with the other one, about possible Winchester area fads. Also, the constant question arises, did Amelia make these all, or were they commercially made? Two have inscriptions putting them in the same year, 1823. She was 63 by this time. Barbara thinks she'd have carpal tunnel after all this time, and maybe we even see that in the depiction of her hand here. And Barbara did one of her famous Photoshop jobs after Bobby Finley got carpal tunnel from working on a mini repro lock quilt. And that's just a partial quilt, and that's only one, let alone 4. It's hard to believe she could churn out 4 of these within a year or even a few years. In the 1820 census, she had 3 enslaved females in the house, but they were probably, I'm guessing, helping out in the inn more than at home. But who knows, maybe they were siphoned off for helping with the sewing. Her only daughter was living far away by this time. Her sons weren't yet married. So other than that, she was without obvious female sewing help. One of our quilts, Rebecca's, specifically says made by Amelia Lauck in the 62 year of her age, 1823. Is it significant that the other one says presented to William and his wife rather than made by Amelia Lauck? I think presented to may just mean that she made it earlier and gave it when they married, which was in the late 1820s, not necessarily that she herself didn't make it, but I'm willing to argue the point. I also think that if these had been made commercially, they'd have less variation and imagination going on, and they wouldn't have run out of fabric and had to fudge the last border. That's really not a saleable product. Lynn has talked about the 6 virtually identical white works coming out of the Lyme, Connecticut area, which we do think are commercial because they are so deliberately alike. Exactly the same motifs and exact same placement, no deviation allowed if you're making multiple things for sale. So although Barbara has opened our eyes to considering the possibility that multiples mean commercial, I still tend to fall on the side of Amelia being the primary maker, even if she had help. But what do you all think?
I have a question. So 2 of them have much fancier extended borders than the other 2. Were those borders cut off, or did she just prefer 2 children over?
No, they were cut off.
They were cut off. Okay.
And we know that because the woman who donated it to the DAR said that she had the cut off borders.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I wasn't clear about that.
Yeah, And we have the photograph of the other one that is now at Williamsburg, where it has its intact border. And we can tell from the details of it that it is that same one. And
Okay.
it came with the one surviving sham that uses small pieces of it.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't clear on that.
I'm
So
wondering,
why'd they cut it off? Sorry, Julie. Why'd they cut it off?
Well, the donor said, well, I feel really bad about it now, but at the time, it didn't fit on the guest bed.
Twin beds, twin beds.
Listen, if it were twin beds, she would have cut it all down the middle. So I'm glad she didn't.
my
I
question
talked to
is,
Ruth Finley's heirs once, and they said, oh, we cut them down to fit the twin beds in the guest room.
Yeah. Or the Mary Manakee album quilt at the DAR, which was cut up to make draperies for the dining room.
Mm.
Yes,
But, you
Julie,
know.
Julie had a question.
yeah, I want to know where Samuel's quilt comes in the order of date.
Samuel's doesn't have an inscription. And so we don't know. And so I find it really interesting that hers is, that one is so different. I wonder whether, and yet the center of it is still a wreath. So that one is very different in its borders. And Morgan's is very different in the center because it has just, you know, the bird and flower motifs not cut up into a wreath. So those two are a little bit different. But so it makes you wonder whether she just got tired of this center medallion, or she didn't cut it up and make a wreath the first time, and then she said, "Ooh, this would be fun if I cut this up and made it into wreaths." And then she did all the rest of them that way. And then she got tired of some of those motifs, and for Samuel, she said, "Oh, the hell with it! I'm just doing a vine." You know,
Yeah,
it's hard to say. I think you could theorize a little bit. Two of them have dates that put it in 1823. The other one, I think, just has Morgan's name on it or something like that. And Samuel is the outlier. It doesn't say who it was made for, but because it stayed in the Winchester area, and Samuel is the only other child who stayed in that area, I think it has to be Samuel. Because Isaac moved to Washington, D.C. and became a government bureaucrat, and is actually buried in my church's cemetery, Congressional Cemetery, just down the road from me. And I have visited, I've paid my respects. Joseph got orphaned and got passed around and ended up in West Virginia.
Well, I think you know, some of the group quilt, the massive bodies of quilts we've seen, I maintain that they were sold and the woman bought them to give to each of her children. But in this case, it's very doubtful, it seems to us. But I do want to say, people had workshops. I've had workshops. It's a wonderful thing if you can afford to pay one woman to do your applique, one woman to do your piecing, and a third to do your quilting. And all you have to do is think up ideas and buy fabric.
And supervise. So, it's possible. Yes. She could have been a supervisor a little bit more like Axa Wilkins.
Yes, Axa is a perfect example.
Yeah, it's possible. And she could have been responsible for the design and the fabric choice, and saying, look, Jane, here's what I want. It's hard to say. And so it doesn't have to have been the enslaved workers in her household, although those are the first people you look to. It could have just been, young teenage girls from her church that she hired or something,
And don't forget apprentice seamstresses. You had to do that to work your way up into being an actual milliner, manual maker, whatever.
But I'm glad you think that this it seems a little more likely to have been at least the product of her brain, if not every stitch from her hands. And no quilt is every stitch from one person's hand, because you invited people over to help you quilt. So everything was a collaborative project. It's a sliding scale. Not every single one. And Lynn, I don't mean a quilting party, but you often just had someone drop by and quilting with you for the afternoon.
I know, but sometimes they did it all by themselves. It's not.
Oh yeah.
Okay. That entirely.
I think you can easily guess that something like that 4 of those, had to have had more than one pair of hands working on it.
That I think that's the secret here. What a body of work. It's more than one woman can do. Hence the carpal tunnel.
Right.
You
right.
just
Which was
can't
called
do that.
tailor's cramp in the period, just so as you know.
Tailor's
Well, that
cramp.
makes sense.
That's
Tailor's
Makes perfect sense.
I'm wondering if the stitching, the quilting on these quilts is consistent throughout each quilt, which
You mean the
if
side?
so, it would mean that
Yeah.
if there were several women, they'd been sewing together for a very long time if you can't distinguish, right?
Mhm.
Right, right. I haven't been able to detect noticeable differences, and I've taken a lot of close-up shots because Kim Ivy and Linda Baumgarten very kindly let me come down to storage and take a really good look, spread out their 2 and spread out our 2, and we just kept going from table to table. And I took lots and lots of close-ups, and someone else might be able to detect better than I can. I don't pretend to be, an eagle eye in that direction, but nothing leapt out at me as saying, oh, wait, this corner is just, not the same level.
Well, if they are consistent, then it suggests she either did it herself or whoever worked with her had been doing it for a very, very long time together.
Right. And, or that, I think it's entirely possible I don't have a trained enough eye to detect it, and I haven't spent enough time poring over all, 200 photographs or whatever I took. So that it might be worth going back and taking a look at it, both myself and someone else who might be able to see it better than I could.
Since you brought up those polka dot quilts, I know Debbie's trying to cut us off, isn't she? Anyway, so
One
those
last thing.
polka dot quilts that are so much the same,
Yeah.
those are consistently 18 stitches to the inch in the quilting.
Amazing.
So, one person might have produced those incredibly intricate quilts. So I'm just
Yeah, I hear you.
suggesting that as
No,
an
you're
example.
right to call me on that
Well,
generalization. I made.
2 in 1823.
2 in 1823 alone.
I know. Well, that's what this
Lot.
body of work brings up. It brings up many questions. Oh,
Mhm.
time. All right.
Okay,
Yeah.
anyway.
Next, our speaker is Lynn Bassett, another independent scholar and a curator who currently has an exhibit up at the Florence Griswold Museum in Connecticut, and new London County quilts and bed covers will be up through the end of the month. So you better get up there. And she's going to show us some New England whole cloth quilts attributable to 2 designers. And I bet there's some relationship between this and the show. I'm guessing.
No, well, maybe.
Maybe. Well, we shall hear from her.
So are you seeing this properly?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I wanted really badly to play with the big girls this month. And so they're letting me do kind of a variation on the theme of 3 quilts by 1 maker. What I've got are 2 quilts by 2 designers that anyway, I'll just start talking. Sorry, I might blather a bit because speaking of that exhibition, why is this not forwarding? There we go. I gave 2 back-to-back tours today, each close to 2 hours each. So I've been talking a lot and my brain is kind of fried. But anyway.
Your brain fried is better than most.
Thank you. So I got really interested in whole cloth quilts like 25 years ago when I was the curator of textiles and fine arts at Old Sturbridge Village. And to understand them, I started drawing them because you can't really see in a photograph what's really going on. And so to contextualize these quilts that are the focus of my talk today, I'm giving you some other quilts just to talk about what these look like in New England and when they started and all that stuff. This is probably, well, at this point, this is the earliest known made in New England whole cloth quilt. They were imported from England but this, as far as I know, was the first one that was the earliest one made in New England. And you can see that it's got this framed center medallion general layout, which is very much like the English ones that are coming over, but it's already breaking out into what we'll see in the New England style of these crazy flowers, very stylized flowers and vines and stuff, and variations on these feather vines and such. So let's move forward. Okay, and so here's another. This one we know came down with the history of having been designed by the Reverend Livermore. And I also, again, I just want to show you how this one's pretty structured with a three-sided border, but how similar it is to other textile forms with these stylized floral and leafy vines. This is a crewel work bed curtain, English, but these very high style designs are filtering down to New Englanders through various forms, including imported goods. But these very high style designs are available to craftsmen in pattern books. And so you see this very high style 17th century design. This is actually a design by Raphael, no less than. But how these designs filter down to rural New England through various craft forms, imported goods, laces, et cetera, and you see very much the same sort of idea, but in a different scale, different manner of stylization. This is a whole cloth quilt from Rhode Island, and since you mentioned my exhibition, yes, this is kind of connected to what I'm looking at in New London County, which butts up against Rhode Island. I'm finding so much connection between New London County and Rhode Island. And this is something Alden and I are going to go and explore in June, aren't we, Alden? Yes, we're going to the Rhode Island Historical Society. They don't know it yet. That's weird coming. And
watch out.
Yeah. But anyway, these reverse curved scrolls are very much typical of that period. Okay, so here is the first quilt. This quilt is my all-time favorite whole cloth quilt, designed and made by Asenath Rising of Suffield, Connecticut, about 1784. And how distinctive are these vines with these designs, these very stylized, you know, you can hardly even call them floral motifs. They're just wild. And here you can see, this is the actual quilt in my exhibition at the Connecticut Historical Society, which you can still access online on their website, that it's a very dark blue. Okay, so this is the first, one of the very first ones that I drew. And then I started looking around in other collections. Oh, whoops, here. See, I have no text because I didn't have time to write one. So I'm looking at how these designs are interpreted from what they're seeing around them. And I just thought it was really interesting that this is a high chest from made by Eliphalet Chapin right across the river from Suffield, and how likely it is that she sees his furniture and sees these interesting cartouche motifs and how they get interpreted by Asenath. And also in silks of the period, again, here's that kind of that vine flower with these crazy little motifs with the feathers and all that. Okay, so I know Asenath pretty well. So then, sorry, no text, I'm just talking. Anyway, and then another important influence are lace designs. And look at these feathery sort of motifs, what we would call a feather motif in a quilting, and how they show up in the quilts. Okay, so I'm at Historic New England looking for more quilts, and I find this one. And I only see like this much of it. And I'm like, boy, does that look like Asenath Rising's quilt. And I do the genealogy on it, and the owner, Lucy King Norton, is from Suffield, same town as Asenath, and she's related by marriage. So what do you think? Asenath had a little side gig going there, drawing quilt patterns for her friends and neighbors and relatives. So that's the first pairing that I made and in my study of these quilts. I'm really interested in, you know, the sourcing and the inspirations from the various decorative arts that they see around them. And you know, here's a gravestone also from Connecticut that has these very similar sort of, look at this, and then look at this. It's very similar sort of idea. Okay, so they're very regional designs in New England's whole cloth quilts. And so when I saw this one at the Smithsonian, I was so fortunate as to examine it in person as well as in their book. I saw these big feather vines, these feather designs, and I was like, that's got to be the Connecticut River Valley, because they just really like these big feathery designs. Okay, so then I saw this quilt again at Historic New England. I thought, boy, that sure looks like the Esther Wheat one at the Smithsonian, but it was said to be from Deerfield and Esther Wheat was from Conway. And I thought, okay, well, fine. They're side by side towns, could still happen. But then I did the genealogy, and Lydia Batchelor is from Conway, as is Esther Wheat. So again, I think we have one person who's doing the quilt drawings in these communities. I don't know who it is in this case, but clearly there was somebody who was doing the designs. I love how both of these have heart motifs on them, and both of these have histories of having been made for a marriage.
And one has your initials, Lynn.
Right, I know, LB, another reason why I really, really love that one. Yep. And so here is just another example of these big feather designs that are so favored in the Connecticut River Valley. This one is heading north into Vermont from Waitsfield, Vermont, but same idea. And again, because I had to fill this out because I don't actually have one quilt maker with 3 and more quilts. More of these feather vines and thinking about their origins. This is a miscellany book of Thomas Trevelyan. This is a one-off. This isn't a printed book that was available in multiple copies, but still, I think we see in his design, you know, a common motif of the period and how that gets translated and carried on for generations into these New England whole cloth quilts. And here's a drawing from a couple of drawings from the diary of Sarah Snell Bryant, another Connecticut River Valley community, showing these feathery designs that were so favored there. And that's what I have for you.
Great.
Wow.
I always love the connections you make to the other media and designs, Lynn. It's just so clear that, you know, and I'm all about also getting people to look at other decorative arts and say, you know, where are these women getting their designs? They're looking at the furniture around them. They're looking at the visual arts around them, to what extent they have visual arts in, you know, small New
Well,
England.
they had it
or
in
whatever town.
wallpapers. I mean, you
Wallpapers,
see this on
exactly.
wallpapers, you know,
And
line
wallpaper was used to line boxes and
Right.
trunks, as you see in your exhibit. So wallpaper wasn't only for walls.
I'm
Yeah.
so impressed, as you are, Alden, with the connections that Lynn makes. I'm trying to imagine what having that kind of visual memory is like. To actually remember, even though you've drawn it, to have it in your head when you're at a different place and recognize the connection is really impressive. It's really wonderful.
Thanks.
Yes.
I
And
was
don't
younger
forget their
then.
whole cloth. Their whole cloth, so they're not even like jumping at you.
Right, exactly.
Right. Well, I think it illustrates also that you have to take every piece of information you have in a museum or with a family with a grain of salt, or 2 or 3, and you have to go back and confirm it. And people get very angry sometimes at you when you say, "I'm sorry, your grandma was wrong."
Well, a couple of those quilts have been published over and over again with the wrong information.
Mhm.
Like that, the Reverend Livermore at the Shelburne, God knows how many times that's been published, but we researched it for the Mass Quilts book, and it's actually from Massachusetts. It's not from New Hampshire.
Oh no, whole wrong state.
So I assume Reverend Livermore was a man. Was that
He
correct?
was, he was.
And
And he took credit.
He designed it, but his sister made it.
I see.
And he was from Northborough originally. He became the minister in Wilton, New Hampshire, which is just over the border. But his sister in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, made it for him when he married his wife, who was from Billerica, Massachusetts. So it's Massachusetts.
It's messy.
They just took it to New Hampshire.
We wonder how often that happened, right? We have no way of knowing, but it could be true of many of the designs.
Right.
But
And also
also-
that Lydia Batchelor quilt has been published as being from Deerfield, but she was from Conway. She married somebody in Deerfield and took it.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think it's so important overall, though, to realize that you might have made a quilt, but somebody else in your community was known as a person who was good at designing those patterns.
And I
so
didn't mention it, but
you call, yeah, oh, I know. But I mean, people that overall in interested in quilt history don't always realize that we picture that, oh, I'm going to make a quilt and now I'm going to draw a bunch of beautiful feather fronds and hearts and pomegranates and whatever. No, you called in your friend and I'm sure you collaborated about, oh, I saw Lydia Batchelor's and I really liked it, but I want a whole border. I don't just want those things falling freely. So, you know, you're collaborating as you did with your dressmaker on the design of what you're going to be making.
This is a wonderful segue to my presentation, which is not next,
Oh, good.
but after that.
I have one more quick thing that I forgot to say. The drawings in the Sarah Snell Bryant diary. She was another person. Her diary shows she drew quilt patterns for her neighbors.
Right.
Commercially.
Well,
Maybe.
in exchange for labor. I mean, I love
Well,
looking
yes, of
diary.
course it was money. We always think of
bartering.
cash.
One of her
Yeah.
neighbors, she
Barter.
wanted a quilt pattern. Well, this neighbor came over and delivered Sarah's baby. So
And watch that work.
exchange
Good deal.
labor.
It's a good deal.
Okay, great.
There.
Now, time to go.
Oh,
Who's-
it's I'm supposed to be the host. I'm looking at a dog out the window. So it's really cute. Our next speaker is Mary Kay Walvogel, who is an independent researcher based in Tennessee. She and Bets Ramsey many years ago conducted the Tennessee Quilt Project, discovering, to no one's real surprise, I'm sure, that Tennessee quilt makers had an independent and rather creative streak. But among them, one of the top most creative is the woman she's going to discuss right now, Sarah White Berry.
Okay, thank you. My name's Mary Kay Walvogel, as Barbara said, and I worked on the State Quilt Project in the 1980s. Bets Ramsey and I finished about 1989. And in the early 90s, the California Quilt Project was starting up. In Tennessee, we had we were interested in collecting quilts only from Tennessee made before 1930, but in California, they were looking at all kinds of quilts. And lo and behold, they found 3 fabulous Tennessee quilts. They were documented there at the California Heritage Quilt Project. And the quilts were by a woman by the name of Sarah White Berry of East Tennessee. I'm going to go back. Both Jean Ray Laurie on the left and Linda Ruther on the right were there that day when the quilts came in. They both knew me. Jean contacted me and said that this man had come with 3 quilts. And did I know this woman? Oh my gosh, we'd never seen anything like this in Tennessee. And so I said, no, but I'll look around. Linda became so interested and taken with Sarah Berry that she, along with Julie Silber, came to Knoxville, and we trudged out to the little town where Sarah Berry was born and died, near Rogersville, Tennessee, in Upper East Tennessee. And here's Linda at the grave at Sarah Berry's tombstone. Really an incredible day. I was just thrilled that somebody from California was so interested in this quilt maker and in her quilt. Interestingly, the tombstone in the late 19th century in a lot of country areas of rural areas of Tennessee, you'd have a tombstone and a footstone. And on the footstone of Sarah's tombstone, it says SB. And you're going to see that a lot on her quilts. There we go. So when Jean and Linda said that they had found these 3 quilts, I began to look around. And this one showed up, and look how similar it is to the one that was found in California. The one on the right was found in California. Now this is the great-grandson owned the quilt. It had traveled from Tennessee, from Sarah Berry's body of work, all the way out to California. And the one on the left had stayed in East Tennessee, again, with a grandson's family. Interestingly, I just think it's fascinating what we just talked about here in New England quilts. Look at all these vines, look at the flowers, look at the shape of the leaves. I too wondered what she was using as inspiration. And we'll maybe can talk about that as we go along. What's different about her quilts that did not appear in really any Tennessee quilts for that was, and really those ones up in New England, Sarah Berry titled her quilts, put the date on it and her initials in the center of at least these 2 quilts. The Morning Glory on the left, The Endless Vine on the right. 1881, about what, 30 years later than the Mary Brown blocks. Then also the quilt on the right was found in California.
Oh my God.
And in this, it's a pieced, well, it's pieced in blocks, different than the vining applique one, but it is, the one on the right is still basically an applique quilt. And in the center, we've got SB 1876. And then I found the one on the left there in Rogersville with help from the family. There was a lot of genealogy that had been provided to me, and I just went out and started asking around in the community, and oh yeah, we knew Sarah Berry made quilts, and oh yeah, she had 10 children, 8 of whom lived to be adults, and something like 43 grandchildren. So the quilts were out there. And the one on the left is kind of a compass design, and the one on the right is still that applique. So eventually, whoops, I'm going back here. Eventually, Jean Ray Laurie put together a quilt exhibit at the Fresno Art Museum in California on the left in 1993. we had those 3 quilts from the James Leonard's family in California, plus 4 more from Tennessee that the quilts traveled out there. And then eventually, about a few months later, we had a similar exhibit there in Rogersville, Tennessee. And by that time, we had 13 quilts that we had found that were on display. This is one that showed up at the local exhibit. And again, you could see she names it in the center, Sarah Berry, the apricot, 1887 SB. Again, those are in Tennessee, there was a folk name for the passion flower vine. And those little pods they would call apricots. It was kind of a folk art name or folky name. And so that's what she's named this. And it's pretty obvious, I think, that she has gone out, found into the countryside, maybe her tree outside her door, and has taken some of the leaves, drawn around them, and used them in her quilts. Notice the veining, excuse me, in the leaves and the cross hatching behind. One thing that's typical here is there's not a border on her quilts, on her applique quilts, really on any of her quilts. And that is, we found to be kind of a regional characteristic in the 1800s of Tennessee quilts. This one is fabulous. It's excellent because it shows what the colors were originally. It's hardly faded at all. Again, we've got the spikiness of the flowers. We have in the center SB 1886. She hasn't titled it here, but this is again descended in the family. It resides in Georgia. Now, right after Jean and Linda contacted me, kind of one of those serendipitous things that happens in quilt history, a dealer, her name is Carol, and a collector, quilt collector, Carol Waller in Knoxville, had shown me this quilt. She had gotten it. And it said on it, SB 1894. And then that's when they called me, I thought, well, could it possibly be the same woman? Well, it surely is. We don't know where it came from, but it's probably the same woman, Sarah Berry. And, this is where you begin to wonder, gathering the quilts in to form the body of work. And then the family, like Barbara was saying, you really have to be careful when the family starts saying, oh, I've got one, I've got one, I've got one. And this one, I loved it because it's a diagonal vine of flowers, again in the same colors that she would use, the red, the cheddar, and the dark green that's faded to a beige. There are no initials on this one, but there is a date, 1890, that's very similarly constructed and drawn as the others. So I do believe it's probably hers. And then here's the full view of the one on the left. Not a very good picture, but it shows you the layout of that quilt, 1894. And the one on the right is the latest one that I have found a few years ago at the Museum of Appalachia in Norris, Tennessee. The director there, John Rice Irwin, probably went out looking specifically for a Sarah Berry quilt and included it in his collection there at the museum. But now, is it really a Sarah Berry quilt? I went out to look at it. First of all, look at the flower, the 2 plants here. They really look like her work, her designs. And then on the left is the date, 1897 SB, and 1894 and SB on the other one. Now, both of these, we don't know exactly which branch they came through, but I'm pretty sure that this is a Sarah Berry quilt. She did make some pieced quilts. This is a pieced, and maybe you would call it applique because it's kind of a Dresden plate. She made this one in 1888. The date is on it. This is really unusual to be putting dates on quilts in this area. So here we are at the end with her body of work, and we're going to compile it as what we've found so far are 15 quilts, 8 with initials, SB, and the date, 2 with dates only, and the dates range pretty early, 1876 through 1897, and 5 with no dates. Of her quilts, 9 are applique, 6 are pieced. Compass was one 1876, Sunflower 1888, Irish Chain, Lone Star, and Wagon Wheel I haven't shown you. And then the one on the left is Ohio Star. And it doesn't have any initials or date on it. It's a pieced quilt. It in the family, the Jerry Gully says that this has been handed down from his great-great-grandmother. So I'm not positive about that one on the left, but would really be nice. So that's it.
I find it interesting that her applique is so freehand, you know, the circles and all that sort of stuff. It just seems to me that the precision of that last star that you showed wasn't the sort of thing that she would be particularly interested in making. I don't know. It's just she was so loosey-goosey with her.
Yeah.
But remember the very first one, her oldest one, 1876, that was a mariner's compass.
Oh, right. Okay.
Pieces on it.
Okay.
I think she did have the ability to do some pretty fine piece things. You know, I put a quilt behind me, kind of thinking, you know, that the quilt behind me might have been made the late 19th century. She is so different than most quilt makers working at this time in Tennessee that I would really like to know know a lot more about her. The fact that she was making those quilts during the time of crazy quilts makes me think that maybe that's why she was putting the dates on there, because crazy quilts are really popular in Tennessee. And I know another thing I want to point out is that she lived in a part of Tennessee, the oldest part of the first capital of Tennessee was Jonesboro, Tennessee. First newspaper, very early printing was going on there. There's definitely some high style furniture that was produced in the area, and it is on the road, the Stagecoach Road up into Southwest Virginia. There may be some migration of art styles that she may have run into. I did go out and look at the place where her farm was one time. I mean, the farm is gone. I mean, she just lived beside a creek. There was a train that went by. She may have gotten on the train to go into either Greenville or Rogersville, but I don't know. You know, you wonder how they made these quilts, in the space they had, in the time they had. I don't just, it's interesting to look at a body of work. And the beauty of this is that these were 2 state quilt projects that really came together. And I don't think I mentioned that it was one that was chosen for that gatherings book that Kathy Sullivan did. And it really was that's what we were hoping would happen with the state quilt projects, that there would be this collaborative effort. I'd really like to revisit a lot of those state quilt projects.
And that kind of cross-fertilization and getting to know happens, you know, now with the internet, it's just unbelievable, right? Like even this presentation right now, however, a couple hundred people see it, whatever, somebody might know a Sarah Berry quilt. And it happens at American Quilt Study Group, which I hope those viewers who aren't familiar with will get familiar with, because we do a seminar every year. And it's amazing what kind of, I kind of think of it as women's and textile history as this big giant mound, and that there are all of us there with our little spoons kind of digging into it. And every
Ice cream
once in a while,
sundae.
there's a whoosh, you know? But now with the internet, it is so much more efficient, and it's just so exciting.
And this is
I just personally appreciate
Did you
it. I just appreciate your presentation personally, because I remember the time, brings it all back. It's really nice.
Did you and Bets find anything else in the area, or even nothing else similar?
Oh, there were interesting applique quilts, you know, red and green applique quilts from 1850s that came out of that area, kind of, but they weren't anything like hers. This, you know, this really, it's a center medallion quilt. I mean, that right there is not what we saw. And they were thin. That another aspect of them, they were thin. And that heavy cross hatching on the back of them, that too is a little unusual. She actually, she did have roots in Virginia. It's possible that she had some quilt makers in her background, and she brought some skills with her, or her mother brought them with her to Tennessee. She was born in 1819 and died in 1898.
The 19th century.
Possibility, yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
I think it's
where
interesting
did the
that-
idea come from?
I knew Mary Kay was going to do this, and I've seen these quilts. So I spent my afternoon looking for Sarah Berry in the newspaper. Didn't find her at all. She didn't show these, say, at the fairs in these counties that I know of, but also trying to find similar quilts, and I didn't until then. Debbie shows us the Mary Brown quilt with the vine and
With
the
the vine.
medallion.
Yeah. But this is
And those
what,
odd-looking flowers, you know, with
And
the,
the odd-looking flowers.
she,
But Mary Brown, you know, it's very far away, very
is.
far away.
and
And
she
it might
used,
just be those, I don't know. I don't know.
Sarah used red plaid fabric in her red and green applique too. That she did that a couple places. She used, so she was using the print fabric very rarely, but she was using
But
the print fabrics
that's
that were
typical of,
available. Yeah.
you know, the South at the time, because they were buying locally. That was what the mills were making, were solids that weren't that reliable, hence all that gray green that faded away.
And she might have
But
been dying
She
that
was
day.
of her area, but she had her own muse.
Yeah. Well, it is time to move on.
All right, to our next.
Alden was
speaker.
trying to say something.
Oh,
thank you. Well, it's one of those things where the conversation moved on, and it's sort of yanking you back 5 points. But following up to what Julie said about, you know, the collaboration, and isn't it amazing and wonderful that the people in California made this connection, and you had these things in Tennessee, you just didn't know who to attribute them to, etc. And this kind of serendipity is great, but I'm just going to put a shout out for the Quilt Index, because a lot of these state documentation projects are on the Quilt Index, quiltindex.org. And then also many museums, including the BAR Museums collection. So you can search by a quilt maker, you can search by region, you can search by a pattern, and you know, probably some other happy congruence situations are ready to be discovered.
And I'm going to give a shout out to Beth Donaldson at Quilt Index, because when I was working on
Absolutely.
this last week, maybe on Thursday or Friday, I said to her, we documented Sarah Berry's quilts, but I never put them up online. And she said, you scan those forms and send me those photos.
Excellent.
Do it tomorrow. I'll have them up by the end of the day. And they
And
were
she
up
did.
on
Amazing.
Friday. So you could go and type in Sarah White Berry, or Berry Sarah White, and there are 10 of her quilts that show up, along with all the dimensions and everything that we looked at when we documented them.
Great.
Our next and last speaker is Julie Silber. Julie's a dealer in antique quilts, and she loves the quilts, particularly the very quirky quilts. She also loves delving into the people's lives. And so today she's going to explore a body of work by a man, Maximilian Johannes. So take it away, Julie.
Thank you. Yeah, it all started with this quilt, and I'm just so excited about today's presentations because you're going to see how many things kind of overlap and come together and all that. It all started with this quilt, which is just a top, but it's more than a, it's got the selvage edge. It doesn't have raw edges. It apparently was made on one large piece of fabric. It's red work, as you can see. And although it's not signed with a name, there is an initial in the center and the date, 1917. I at first thought that was a Y, but when we get to the end, you'll see that I think it may not be a Y. But I didn't know anything about what this might be. And somewhere along the line, I believe at American Quilt Study Group, it was suggested to me, I think by Polly Mello. I must have brought this for show and tell. Polly Mello, who has lent so many pieces to Debbie today. This piece is mine. I bought it when I had Mary Spickler's quilt, which in the 1970s, and I've had it ever since. And it was suggested to me that Polly Mello had, well, let me go to the center here. So here's the center. You can see that the work is very fine. This side, the quilts are behind me, the two that I'm the quilted one. And I think you can see how finely executed that embroidery is. But I heard from Polly Mello that she had three quilts that were somewhat similar, and some of them were signed by someone named Maximilian E. Johannes or Johannes. So here's more details of that original one. Got the name. Here is an edge to what he did on this one that's behind me. It's very symmetrical, very put together. All four seasons are on the four centers, on the four sides. Got these cherubs, love, hope, faith, and charity on this one. Winter and the other seasons around the side. Here's winter, where you can see Father Christmas, a favorite of our friend Barbara Garrett. A woman skating, just very charming. Here's summer, where people are wading in the water, a June wedding, and so on, charity and faith. This is all my Max Johannes piece number 1. Details, just so you can see how delightful his illustrations were. Then, about 3 years ago, I found this for sale at an auction, and I bought it, and I knew, of course, right away that it had been made by him. But he was very kind in this case, because down here it says, and let's get a little bit closer. You're looking at the center, and this one is on my left. And down at the bottom, he writes, drawn by Maximilian Johannes, Allentown, Pennsylvania, 1912. So now we're looking at a quilt that is finished with hand quilting, very similar, finished in 1912, and the one, the top that I own is dated 1917. So I then, of course, got in touch with, I'm just going to show you some details here. Again, finely embroidered, excellent work, very charming illustrations. Now, the museum at Michigan State University has one with a very, very poor photo that we can't exactly see, but it is likely him. I'm not even sure if it's signed. I haven't gotten to them to find out if it is signed, but it is so similar in so many ways. It is dated 1895. Now these are, the next ones I'm going to show you are Polly's. And so we're going back in time. This is the earliest one that we know of. It's 1895. And I believe it says in the center, Charles and Sarah T. or J. Seeger. Let me get a little bit closer here. So this is, and you can see that his letters are old-fashioned, and they're the calligraphy. They're similar to the calligraphy of those Pennsylvania quilts that we see that are inscribed by hand. Old-fashioned stuff, but 1895. Now, 1900. Here, this one's dated 1900. Right here, you can see AD 1900, and I believe his name is right here. The inscribed name is Mary Simon, which is going to be very difficult to follow up on. It's such a common name. But what's interesting about this one is, of the ones that we know, this one is in German or High Dutch or whatever it is. The others that have words on them are all in English. 1905. So we've got 1895, 1900, 1905. We're moving up. Again, the seasons, this is Polly's as well, the seasons with all the illustrations that go with the seasons, and then these virtues all the way around. Getting a little bit closer. On this one, he has health, and one place he has luck, hope, I forgot one, contention. This one says contention, which I thought was kind of interesting. There's no name in the center, but it is dated. So I just wanted to go from one of the early ones, which is this 1900 one, not the earliest, but to the 1917 one, which is the latest one that we know of. We now know that he died in 1918, so this would have been among his last pieces, the one that I own that's on my right. So what do we know about this guy? Not that much, but something. This was in the Allentown paper and the newspaper, and what happened was they had a contest, and the contest was to identify the town that a cartoon, it's kind of like a rebus almost. It's a cartoon, and if you can interpret it correctly, you get the name of the town. And they gave a prize, and the first prize was $2, and it went to Maximilian himself. And here it gives us his address in Allentown. So we know that he was kind of clever, at least in this particular way. Now, look at this. The fine colored drawing of the city of Allentown made by Max Johannes can be seen at Wilson Crumb's Lehigh Valley Hotel. This can be secured at a small figure by consulting Mr. Crumb or Mr. Johannes. August 30th, it will be disposed of. I'm going to find it. This was 1902. I really want to find that if it made it this far. We know that he worked at Bethlehem Steel. And this is where the thing gets to be kind of, it gets to me emotionally, and let me explain. He worked at Bethlehem Steel in the projectile project in World War I. He worked in the factory where Bethlehem Steel was making projectiles. They were making bombs and bullets and that kind of stuff. And this is a photo of that. And look how patriotic it was, and how tied to the war effort and the pro-American troops, et cetera, et cetera. However, he had come to America from Germany and had been here 20 years by the time he died. He came when he was 43 or so. And in 1918, there was the Alien Enemies Act, which after America entered the war, President Wilson declared all German citizens in the US alien enemies, and they were barred from living near military facilities or airports or in Washington, DC. And in addition, if they had any connection to Germans, including American women married to Germans, they had to disclose their bank accounts and other property. They had to fill registration affidavits and be fingerprinted. And anybody who failed to comply with these demands were considered potentially dangerous and were placed in internment camps. Internment camps. I never knew that the Germans were in internment camps. And perhaps it's a well-known fact, but I did not know it, of course. We come to think of the internment camps that we made in World War II, but I'm learning something every day. So these are German men going off to an internment camp. They were in Georgia, these internment camps, for some reason. So here's what we know about Maximilian Johannes. He was born in 1856 in Germany. He came here at age 43 in 1898. I'm just thinking now that there's an 1895 quilt. How could that be? All right, here we go. He lived in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He worked at Bethlehem Steel in the projectile project, and his name appears in the alien enemy list in 1918. This is a guy who worked in the factory for America, creating weapons for us to fight the war, and he now shows up on the alien enemies list along with anybody else who had anything to do with Germany. Here are his known quilts, 1895, 1900, 1905, 1912, and 1917. There is a quilt in the collection of Arlen and Patricia Christ, and I haven't been able to, I've asked them to tell me more about it and send me a photo. I don't know the date of it, but those are the quilts. Now, here's his obituary. Stricken with apoplexy while talking about the war, Max Johannes, 62 years old, died early yesterday morning at Union Hotel, 6th and Union Street. He was in conversation with several friends in a side room of the hotel. Without warning, he toppled over on the floor and died almost immediately. Mr. Johannes was a native of Germany and had been in this country for the past 20 years. He was noted for his musical ability and was considered quite a critic on matters pertaining to that art. Mr. Johannes was not married and no relatives survive and the funeral. Here's a guy who died, by the way, on November 8th, 1918. November 11th, 1918 was Armistice Day. Here was a guy who was stricken with apoplexy while talking about the war, died 3 days before the end of the war. You know, we could imagine all kinds of things and have to make sure that we don't, we don't know. But here's a guy who was German, was working, thought of himself as an American, apparently worked in the steel, worked the war effort, and was talking about the war as he fell over and died. What would it be like to be here and be considered an alien enemy? I just thought it was really interesting, the kind of detail in this obit. First of all, it's much more detailed than we usually see about when he died and where, how he died. And anyway, I was very moved by this whole thing. I have come to the conclusion, and I may be wrong, again, this is 1917 and the year before he died. I used to think it was a Y, and now I'm wondering whether it's not an M and a J put together, which would be Max Johannes. We don't know. What we do know is that whatever life he lived and whatever mattered to him, he left us this wonderful body of work, which, by the way, to be clear, and where this crosses over so much with what else we've been talking about today, he designed them. He probably drew them. He said on that one piece, drawn by. He did not sew them. Did he have someone else sew them and sell them? Each of them, many of them seem to have in the center a date, and perhaps that couple, that was a marriage date. I actually did a little work on that this morning and couldn't find the Charles and Sarah Seeger, S-I-E-G-E-R. But I found a bunch of them, but I didn't find the right ones. In any case, here's a guy who either commercially or as a hobby, we don't know, drew these things, and women maybe bought the large piece and finished it themselves, or maybe he had them finished, or maybe, who knows, we don't know. I can tell you that what I found out during the research for this talk presents a very appealing rabbit hole. I think there's more to find out about him, and I think it's not going to be too hard. I think that there's going to be lots more that we'll find out about this very interesting guy who was a musician and illustrator and just interesting guy.
Wow.
I find it so interesting that his death notice said, oh, he was known for his musical ability, but no one mentioned his drawing. I mean, if he was, if we have that 6 or 7 surviving quilts or bed covers, how many more must he have drawn for that many to have survived? And you would think that would be well known in his community.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting that there's no mention.
The first one we have is dated 1895, and the last one that I have here is 1917. So that's a long, that's the 20 years.
Yeah.
Although, are you going to
now,
go ahead, Alden?
Well, the 1895 versus he emigrated supposedly in 1898. That's a little discrepancy that needs addressing, but it's kind of intriguing. Sorry, go ahead, Lynn.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, probably.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's probably just a date issue, probably because there's little doubt that he didn't do this in Germany.
No.
And so he probably came as early as 1895 and not 1898. They said, I think actually they said he's lived here for the last 20 years, which is kind of could be approximate, you know, it's like kind of like didn't say the year or anything.
And it could mean that town.
Oh, Allentown.
If you find him in the 1900 census, I think people had to say the year of their emigration.
Yeah, and the city directory, I did look for his address, and it's been taken over by there's a small college there, so his house is not there anymore. But
well, this would be considered fracture work. I mean, it's the classic fracture, and it had faded out in Pennsylvania to a large degree by this time, but he's fresh from Germany, so he would have brought that with him. And it sure looks like he is a left brain guy with music and art. I mean, he looks like either he had some art training or he had a wonderful eye, because a lot of these look like his little figures look like they came from advertising.
Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah.
Cartoons and paper.
You're right. I hadn't thought of the fracture connection. Of course, it's coming straight out of that.
Yeah,
It's
that's
in the
great.
Medium. Yeah, I love that. Cool. We've seen some really cool stuff today.
I know it.
Wonderful to see a lot of pieces designed or made by the same people.
Yeah.
We'll do it again, because it really is. You learn so much about what they're doing and how to contrast it with the context of what else is going on.
And think about what their design approach is and what their specific, working through the evolution of their style and how they want to make variations on what they like to do. It's very cool.
He would be considered, I'm just thinking about this now, he'd be considered an illustrator, right? He probably didn't do any of the needlework. And I'm wondering if there were women or people who marked quilts who didn't do the work, who wouldn't really be called quilt makers. Does that make sense?
Quilt designers.
Well, they might have made quilts too, but they just were also drawing them for other people.
Right.
So Julie, you've got those right there behind you. Did he mark them in pencil or in ink?
They've been washed, and so I can't.
Oh, probably pencil.
I didn't wash them, but I'm going to take a quick look here, see if I can.
I think it's amazing that so many of them ended up in the hands of you and Polly Mello. But I guess once you've seen one, I mean, it's still pretty remarkable that another one found its way to you guys. But having seen one, you certainly are going to zoom in on the next one you see.
Yeah, Debbie.
So will the rest of us.
Did Polly buy the 3 together?
No.
He did not. Oh.
No, I don't think so. I think they came at various times, mostly from eBay.
Wow.
Yeah, but he's in Allentown, and like you, Mary Kay, you could go they're going to be around there. Probably they were made for people there and events there. They're probably going to, if they're going to show up, that's probably a place to look.
Road trip to Allentown.
Let's go.
Show us your
Well, the
quilt.
museum has a great textile collection there.
Yes,
Yeah,
there's a lot of good stuff in
road
Pennsylvania.
trip.
Well, we had a good time doing this. We hope you enjoyed it. And we will give you information about the next one when we're going to do, let's see, we're going to do May. And we will keep you posted. We hope to keep on doing this because we have so much fun, even if we don't have time to do it, like me who didn't do one today. So thanks for coming, and we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Did you know you can watch our previous episodes on Vimeo? Vimeo.com/quiltdistrict/VOD_pages. Or you can search for the 6 know-it-alls when you go to the main page of Vimeo.com. You can also catch our first 3 episodes, which are free, on our YouTube channel. You can go directly to our YouTube channel, or you can go to youtube.com and search for the 6 know-it-alls. You can also find all the updates and links to previous episodes on quiltdistrict.com. Go to quiltdistrict.com and then the 6 know-it-alls tab, and there you'll find all the upcoming episode information, as well as the background on how the 6 know-it-alls got started and some biography information on all of the know-it-alls. You'll also want to be sure you put your email address in here so that you can get notified of upcoming events straight to your email inbox.
And I'm harping on this because lighting is so important to understanding the seasonal rhythms of quilting in this early period and why it began to change in the 19th century.
But that's not the way we use it, just to stick it in there. And so often you will find some turkey red pieces just put in there for a little flair. Even this one has a little bit of red down there, although that's a wool.
This is one quilt that I wanted to talk about today because we just were able to add it to the collection last year. Yeah, it was on loan for many years from the family. And some of you know the quilt maker Anna Catherine, known as Catherine Hummel Markey Garnhart of Frederick, Maryland. And thanks to my predecessor, Nancy Gibson, we now know of 10 quilts made by Markey Garnhart. And we now own 3.
Yes.
Yes.
Interesting. And that is very interesting that it's made for the wife of a minister. And I have never heard of the lady sewing group being called a circle of industry. So that's quite interesting. I wonder if it belongs to that denomination, if there are others that call themselves something similar.
So I just wanted to show how the designs of these bed rugs relate to whole cloth quilt and other types of quilts. So here we have one of the foot bed rugs, and here we have a whole cloth quilt that was made by Olive Curtis Baker in Connecticut. And the stitching of this whole cloth quilt is basically pretty much the same idea as you see in the bed rug.
The thing is, and this goes back to Lynn too with the bed rugs. If we were looking at men's work, if we were looking at ceramics like graffiti plates or painted chests, we wouldn't be thinking of it as a hobby.